Good morning. Well, today we're going to be having a bit of a workshop day and we're going to start work on the FTX Comet. Now, if you look back in some of our older videos, you'd have seen everything about these. We've already done 4 and we had them right from stock. This is bone stock, brand new, totally slow. I mean, good fun, indestructible at that speed, but slow, right the way up to a mad one we got over 40 miles an hour out of. So with what we learnt with the crazy one, we're sort of making a middle ground one now, a brushless upgrade, not too much power, just a fun, usable, bashable, small scale car that can go anywhere. So I imagine for a lot of people buying these it'd be their first car, so forgive me if it gets a bit patronising, but I want to break it down to a step-by-step guide to the modifications, how you do them and what they achieve. So as stock, these are brilliant. They don't break. My kids have got one each and they've never broken anything. I think it's because they're too slow, to be honest. You could crash them full speed and it's going to be fine. But there are really simple upgrades you can do to make them enjoyable for even someone like me who's used to, you know, quite a powerful, fast RC. So I won't go into massive details because we've unboxed these before. But it's a very simple setup. All the electrics are combined in that. You've got a small 380 motor, gearbox, servo. It's a 5-wire servo, so it's not compatible if you then change the receiver. Then underneath you've got a battery tray. In there you've got a small Li-ion battery at 6.4 volts and it doesn't give a great deal of power. So that is the first upgrade you can do. Launch that. No one likes those, they're rubbish. Grab yourself a LiPo. Now that's a jump to 7.4 volts. It doesn't sound like much, but we know that it takes these from about 12 miles an hour to about 18 or 19, which is a huge improvement. And it's not just the top speed, it's the acceleration, it's the punch they get out the hole, and it's great. So you might notice mini Tamiya connection on the car, Dean's type plug on a LiPo. You'll more than likely not find a LiPo with a Tamiya connection because they don't flow that well. But you can overcome that really simply just with a simple adapter like that plugs in the battery at that end and into the vehicle at that end. Or if you want to get fancier, you can cut the wires there and solder on the correct connection. The only sort of word of caution with that is that at some point something's going to give. It's taken it outside of what it's designed for, and although it can handle it and it will handle it, eventually it won't handle it. It's either going to burn the motor out or fry the ESC receiver unit. But one thing you can do as a bit of a preventative step is fit a heatsink to the motor. It's really simple. This is one of the motors that came out of it. And a heatsink simply a piece of heat conductive metal. So when you clip it to a motor, the heat generated by the motor will soak into that, and it's got a larger surface area with all of the fins that airflow can go over, draw the heat out of, so it just lets the motor run cooler by, you know, allowing more heat to dissipate. So it's just a way of increasing sort of motor life a little bit. It's a bit of a sort of sticky plaster over a bullet hole kind of jobby, but you know, it works. It's a couple of quid, whazz it on, you're not going to do any harm. But yeah, where these fall over is after that, because you can get these engines spinning really fast. I mean, we've got to the stage where we fitted all the different electronics, a huge battery, and we've kept that motor. But what you'd normally do is then change the gearing. Because if you imagine you're on your push bike in first gear, it doesn't matter how fast you pedal, you're never going to go any faster. At some point you could have Usain Bolt on a push bike, it's going mental. You're only ever going to do like 8 miles an hour in first gear. And it's the same with these. You can get these engines spinning at a crazy speed, but because they've only got one set of gears with these, that's it. It's never going to go any faster. It doesn't matter how fast that engine's turning. And the problem comes from this. Now I'm doing you a big favour here, because the last thing you want to be Googling is about increasing shaft size. Trust me, it's hard enough explaining this hobby without having that in your search history. But these are tiny, and there's no gears that I've yet found that you can replace onto this miniature sort of motor shaft that comes out of there. So that means, yeah, this motor can do what it wants, but you're set to that gear ratio that comes with the car. There's nothing you can do to speed it up. So that's when it gets a bit more drastic. If you want any more speed than just adding a few more volts through these, we got to get cracking. So it means tearing it down, starting to do something proper. Now, they're really simple to work on. They've only got two fittings. They got Phillips head screws and a couple of Allen keys around the suspension. So I'd recommend getting a decent set of small size screwdrivers, because your normal household screwdriver is going to be too big. It's not going to work. Oh yeah, a wheel wrench. First RC car I've ever bought. Doesn't come with a wheel wrench. Weird. And Allen keys. I know normally you might see like an Allen key like you get with your IKEA furniture. I'd recommend something like this. It's got 4 different sizes. Pull one out, whazz it in, and you're off. Easy to grip, decent quality heads that won't round stuff out. So yeah, on to phase 2. Right, so the second phase of building yourself an FTX Comet is replacing the radio gear, because you can't upgrade much, because you can't put much more power through this unit. Most remote control cars won't have one of these. They'll have a receiver that gets the signal from your handset, that'll be there or wherever, and they'll have an ESC which simply controls the motor. Your ESC is what really limits how much electricity you can give it, so what voltage it can take, whether it can take a LiPo battery. So that's really important, and one of the main restrictions on these is this unit. So we're going to replace it with regular electronics. That also means we need to replace the steering servo, because as I mentioned before, this has got 5 wires. It works with this, but most steering servos, any servo, will have 3 wires. So unfortunately, when you change this out, you've got to change that out. Gets a bit expensive if you're doing it brand new, but for me, I've got loads of stuff knocking about. I'm just going to raid a few bits. Don't go for some insane, don't think you can upgrade the servo and go to some 20 kilo high torque thing. There's no point, because you've got 2 screws there and 4 screws there. They're all that hold the front on. If you put some nut servo in it, it's going to flex all this about. It might pull the screws out. You don't need to go crazy. These are really light, you know, really small cars. Just get any basic, like the most basic, like Lidl servo you can find. It'll be fine. It just needs to have 3 wires so that it works. So I'm not going to do this real time. I'll put it on some kind of like montage thing. But for the minute, we're not going to change the engine out, because as I demonstrate it, this is just to change the radio gear so you can safely run a LiPo, but you're not going mad yet. You just want a bit more speed. You're not going to change that engine out. So I'll leave it with options for the time being. So the rough goal here is we remove that. We're taking the servo out. And in its most basic form, to do that, you've got these 4 screws underneath the vehicle. They hold this front clip on. There's 2 on the top. At that point, this whole front unit's going to pull away as one. And then underneath this bar, you've got 2 screws there. So it's a really simple job to achieve. It's not beyond the realms of like anyone that hasn't worked on an RC car before. I'm pretty sure they could do it. So let's whiz it off, and I'll get back to you when that bit's done. Right, so that's it stripped down for the first stage. So you've now got the front section here with your steering and suspension. That's its own modular sort of thing. And the chassis with no electronics. Now what I like to do is, once you take something apart, so you don't lose track of where the screws go, just put them back wherever they came out of. I mean, they won't go rolling across your desk then. Screws tend to like to go back in the same hole they came out of in case they've made a weird thread. And yeah, it just means you can't forget. If I now have to go do something, you know, I'm going to come back, I'm going to know where those screws are. So now it's time to install some new electronics, which I'm going to have to rob out of of something. I'm going to use this Traxxas handset and a matching receiver. Fitting them is reverse of what you've just done, really. So you've got the servo goes back in its cradle. You just need to choose where you want them. You could slap them back on the top if you're potentially planning the big battery mod that we do in the future. So you can run a full-size pack in these. You might want to put them on the side. But the other advantage you've got is you're changing from not waterproof as the model comes to a waterproof setup, if that's what you choose. That means you can run it, you know, in wet grass, splash it through a puddle, just makes it a bit more usable. So yeah, I'm going to rob those up and I'll get back to you in a bit. Okay, so I've been on the rob. I've got, not literally like from my own cars, don't be naughty. So we've got handset and receiver, or transmitter and receiver, or TX and RX, depending on how you look at it. This is just a Traxxas one. Nothing too special there, but it will do the job. And got a steering servo. Again, nothing mental. It's plastic, it's probably plastic geared, but it is waterproof. If you get the choice with any electronics, go for waterproof. Doesn't mean you're going to be launching it into lakes, but you never know. Like, even if you're not trying, if you're down the park but you spin out and you land upside down in a puddle or something, it just gives it that little margin of not dying, which is great. So yeah, we're going to whack this back on, but it's very important that when you rebuild the car after ever changing a steering servo on any car, don't put it all back together yet, because you don't know when you turn the car on if this is going to go. So you don't reconnect any steering until you've got a battery plugged in, but I'll show you that as we go on. So yeah, back together we go. First sort of vaguely technical bit we've come to. Now got the steering servo in. The receiver tucks away really nicely actually in that bit of the chassis there, so I've put that there. But we can't reattach the steering until we know that that's centered, because otherwise we might turn the car on, we think the wheels are straight, and as soon as you turn the controller on, and then all you can do is turn right. So what you need to do is you need to check whatever handset you've got, no matter what shape it is, what type it is, it will have a trim which lets you move the steering slightly right or slightly left. So, you know, if you've got any imperfections in the car, you find it's veering off, you can adjust it a bit. But at the minute, you want this to be as central as you can get it without any adjustment. So on this one, it's got a 0 point there. I'm going to put that to 0. That means when I bolt this together, as long as the wheels are straight, it's going to be as straight as you can get it. So I've had to quickly rig up to apply some power to it all. I'm just plugging this ESC in with a battery. When you plug in wires into it, easy thing I remember, you've got channel 1 and channel 2, which is steering and ESC. You can add a channel 3 for light kits or whatever, but you know, that's way advanced. I just remember 1 for turn, 2 for burn. So your steering servo goes in number 1, your ESC goes in number 2. So I don't actually know if this battery's got any charge. As always, handset on first, and then turn on the ESC. And if this is going to move, you should hear it go. Bzzzt. There we go, see? So if I'd have bolted all that together before I did that, the steering would now be all over the shop. So yeah, happy days. Make sure that now doesn't move while you bolt it up. Get back on with it, and you're going to end up with nice straight steering. Tip number 1, apart from the shaft size thing. There we go, we have steering. Works fine, centered up, brilliant. So turn that off. At this point, if all you wanted to do was to be able to safely run a LiPo and upgrade your power a little bit, you are done. You just need an ESC. Now, to go with the standard motor, you can see a brushed motor like this has 2 wires. You'd order a brushed ESC, you can get these for like £10 upwards, 2 wires, That's it. Plonk it on, boom, you're done. Like that. That is it. Stop watching the video now. Thanks for watching. Hope this helped. All of the next bits are aimed at upgrading to brushless, which, to be honest, is like the only way to go nowadays. I mean, back in the day, you had petrol for power, electric for, you know, trundling round. Nowadays, brushless is just, once you've done it, you just won't go back, you know. It'd be like trying to just only ever eat with chopsticks for the rest of your life, like, but you've been used to a fork. So, yeah, where's that? I don't want that. That come off my crawler. So, done. So, yeah, the next stage is upgrading the motor. I mean, I haven't fixed this yet. It was just to add some power for the steering, but this is what we're actually going to use. It's a Gould RC little setup here, brushless power. So you can see a brushless will have 3 motor wires, and the motor itself is in here. It's a 380 sized can, which is the same size as is already in the vehicle, but it's got the proper sized 3-point-something millimeter motor shaft, which means I can go into my box of spares and I can choose a gear ratio. And by doing that, it's a bit like I explained with the bike thing. If you go for a small gear on the motor here, you get really good acceleration, but you'll run out of puff, you'll top out quite early. If you go for a big gear, you lose a bit of acceleration, but you get more top speed. And you can mess about because different gear ratios will make it run hot, you know, if it's too much strain. So you can sort of mess about over time and find what suits the vehicle. I know with our speed build one, we went to a 21 tooth gear, which is big. I mean, as standard, these have 14. And normally, if you were changing gear ratios, you'd go up in increments of 1 or 2, not like 7. So, and we know that was too fast. It just destroyed everything, like tyres, done, gearbox, done, ankles, like danger. So I reckon we go to a 17 or 18 gear or something with this, but that's, you know, that's for messing about as we find out. So next step in this really is to tear into the rear end. We're going to reinforce a few bits. I know it can take a hell of a lot of power because we've already proved it. And on the way round, I'll show you sort of how to do it and what we're doing. First thing will be these drive shafts. Now you see on this vehicle, they're quite big drive shafts, you know, they're fairly beefy, but they're plastic, and at some point they're going to give. The best way I can show you is Blue Peter style with some I prepared earlier. So here is the standard drive shaft. It's got 4 knobs on the end, for want of a better word, and it's plastic. Nice and light, they're easy to change, they're cheap if they do break. Now at the end that the wheel attaches to here, you've got a plastic drive cup that goes into, and at the gearbox end, coming out of the differential, again plastic. So as you can imagine, fine for the standard setup, but after a while, one of these is just going to shred or round out, or it's going to snap. So you want to upgrade to one of the options they list, which is the metal dog bone. What they don't tell you, or what at least most of the websites didn't say, when you buy these, you can't just fit them. They're a different length, and even if they weren't a different length, they don't work in those. So you actually upgrade, and it's quite a difficult job then, because you need to upgrade the bits coming out of the gearbox, which means tearing that apart, and the bits on the wheel end. So I'll go through that in a minute. I've actually still got to tear them out of the car. So yeah, that's a whole nother job. But if we take off the gearbox cover here, I can show you what we're actually starting with. So what I find weird though, they don't provide a wheel wrench with this car. So if something does go wrong, you're a bit stuck. Because as a prime example, I want to take this gearbox cover off. It's 2 screws. I've done one. There's one down there. Not going to happen, is it? It's not going to happen. Provide one of these wrenches. They're like, whatever. Like, they can't be much, can they? To add that value, don't give you a car that you can't fix. Pointless. It's like, doing a food drive, give everyone like, oh, here's some like tin peaches. Can't have a can opener. Stay hungry. So there we go. So we get the other screw out there, and then you'll be able to see fully plastic gears. Now that is not a great thing. It's fine for the amount of power this puts out of stock, but as soon as you upgrade anything, most RCs are going to have the spur gear there as plastic, but the pinion gear would be metal. I mean, it's sealed in, you're not going to get dirt in there, but again, it's just another thing that if you're going to more power, you're going to want to upgrade it. I mean, you are going to upgrade it anyway, because you're launching that gear out with the motor. So the motor's actually really easy to change on its own. If you were keeping a brushed ESC and you wanted to say fit a spicier brushed motor, it's just two screws, one there, out it comes, pop another one in, you know, jobs are good in. But you're never going to gain much power with a brush motor, not enough to be worth doing. And value wise, you can buy a cheap brushless setup like this for like the same money. So if it's not a case of one's really unaffordable, they're both on a level playing field, just go for the better one. So but I've got to tear all this down to do the drive shaft. So again, I'll show you the rough gist of it, and we'll get on and do it in a time lapse. So just take the gearbox and the rear end out. It's pretty modular like the front end. You've got 5 screws there, Phillips head screws, same as the other ones, and then you just need to disconnect the suspension, so that there, the top of the shock absorber, and they pretty much pop off, to be honest. I think that was it. Rear bumper screws, and then it'll all come off in one big unit, and we'll get going from there. So see you on the other side of that one. Right, when you've broken the back end down, you'll end up with this. Took the motor out, that's easy, 2 screws. Your drive shafts, they'll just fall out as you disconnect the arms, and you don't need those anymore. See you later. And then you get the 2 sort of suspension components. So our next task is that we want to upgrade to the metal drive shafts. And as I said before, they're not compatible with the drive cups that are either in the diff end or in the wheel end. So what do we do about that? Well, pretty easy really. First of all, these are the metal upgrade that accept the end of the drive shaft. They've got the 1 slot in rather than 4. And this here is what you've currently got on the vehicle. So to change that, we pop that hex off. There'll be a pin in there that comes out, and that will simply pull out. Really easy. Easy enough that I think I can do it real time. If you're not bored already, then something's wrong, so you might as well wait a few seconds longer with me. So off that comes. Eventually. Right, actually, I forgot. Case in point, another weird thing with these cars, there isn't a pin inside these. They just have a moulded hex shape, which is weird. Most cars will have a pin, and it even has the notches for a pin, so why they do that I don't know. Right, pull that out. It'll leave the bearings in there. Another thing you don't need. This then goes in, small pin, make sure not to drop it, goes through that hole. Pin's double purpose, it stops it being able to pull back through, but it also goes into the hex to actually spin it round. Otherwise you'd have two round holes and one would spin inside the other. I machined these out myself. Standard hex, I made the middle slightly bigger on one side, extra big on the other side so it fits over that step, because these aren't a regular hex fitment. I don't know why they sell you like 50% of the parts, but for some reason they sell you these upgrades but not enough to finish the job. So there is a little bit of machining and messing about required, like this. I'm going to put you back on for this one because I'm going to swear a lot. Now, this next bit is by far the most complicated upgrade to do. This is where I'd say you need some experience working with RCs, because it does get a bit tricky, this one. What needs to happen is that these drive cups coming out of the diff, coming out of the gearbox there, have to be changed out for the metal ones, which means you need to put all of this apart and literally get into the guts of the gearbox and change it over. Now, I'm in two minds about this. A lot of me would say to change the drive shaft on a stock truck, you can do it without any tools. In situ on the truck, you can pop one of these ball joints off, the wheel does that, the shaft will fall out and you can put a new one in. So for the cost of a new drive shaft and for the ease of doing it, is it worth doing the job I'm about to do? Well, I don't know, because I've never seen how much power you can put through the stock shafts. It wouldn't be a mission of a job, but there's something about knowing that if you're out and it's covered in like mud or gravel, or you've been through a dog turd by accident, you're not going to have to get to the point where you need to be messing about with tiny screws and that outside. You just know it's going to be alright. And if you're already going to this level, what's a little bit extra? So, you know, that's something to mull over really, depending on your skill level and laziness level. I tend to vary between being quite skilled and very lazy. Sometimes I've got no skill. I don't know, that's up for debate anyway. But to achieve what we need to achieve, we need to remove this rear bumper assembly and this rear shock tower, because they hold it apart. They stop it from coming apart. So you've got 2 screws there, and you've got 4 screws in here for the shock tower assembly. Once that comes off, you'll be left with the bare gearbox, and there's 4 screws there to get that in half. So once that's in half, we'll get back to you again, show you how to do the diff, and then we're pretty much over the sort of summit of difficulty then, and we go, okay, so the gearbox is now ready to come into 2 parts. And when you do that, you'll normally find that you get this half with the differential and the drive cups come out in one bit, and the remainder will stay in the gearbox. Now, on our crazy build where we put a huge engine in it, that is what melted. This gear was unrecognisable. That bearing went, I've never found it, and yeah, it went a bit mad. So the only weak link we found, which again you can't call a weak link because it's like, how's it weak when it's doing 4 times what it's supposed to do, but was that gear. But they do have bearings, you know, they spin nice and freely, so it shouldn't be an issue. But what you need to do is obviously change these drive cups over, and to do that you remove the diff, which just literally pushes out. It's a bit of a tight fit through there. You then undo these 4 screws. Your diff will come into 2 pieces, and there is 1 screw holding each of these cups in the diff. When you undo it, they will pull out. Now luckily, I've got one out of the other car to show you the difference. So when you look at them side by side, standard diff cups there, new diff cups there. So you can see they're shorter, they're shallower, they're totally different. So I don't have to bother taking that apart. That's one for you guys. So then you got your new improved diff with your metal drive cups, and you simply waz that back in making sure that when it is in, the bearings are sitting where they need to and everything's happy in there and it's nice and free spinning. You put that back in, do it all back up, and you're ready to then put your new motor on, which is what we'll get to next. Right, the gearbox is now back together in one piece. Put all the other bits back on, and I've installed the motor, which was just 2 screws. But what you'd be careful with when you're doing any form of motor work or changing gears is the gear mesh. Now the gear mesh means, and it's easier to see now I've got a metal gear, how these 2 gears fit together. Now if they're too loose, then one's able to spin without the other one and you'll end up shredding all of this. So obviously the metal's stronger than the plastic, but even if they were both plastic, you'd end up just wearing these gears away and they wouldn't work. If they're too tight, if they're really rammed together, there'll be a lot of resistance as the motor tries to turn the gears, and you'll end up creating a lot of heat, and you may well burn a motor out, or you'll just end up, it'll run really hot, or you'll get bad run times. So what a lot of people say is if you get a thin strip of paper and you insert it, and you should be able to sort of pull it through the gears and it will crinkle up, but it won't jam. I find that a bit fiddly. It's one of those jobs you need a load of hands for. My way of setting mesh, I mean, if you don't know, you'll always have one slotted hole and one fixed hole. The motor pivots around the fixed hole along the slot and the gear will move in and out. As you fit different size gears, you'll need to adjust the size. But how I like to do it is if you got one, you get them meshed, obviously together, and there should just be that tiny bit of play so that if you're holding one gear, in fact, you might be able to hear it if I get this right by the mic. This is what I listen for. It's that little clicky noise, just means, you know, I'm in there, I'm happy, but I've got just enough play there that, you know, I'm not going to munch myself, I'm not too tight. So that is my ideal mesh, and I tend not to chew up many gears on RC cars. I've got that down to, you know, it's taken a while, but you sort of get used to it. The gear pitch for these, if you're looking at gears on eBay, it's 32 dp. They list it as 0.6 mod or something. It isn't. I bought one, it's wrong. It's 32 dp. I've barely changed the ratio on this at the minute, only because I needed some gears with quite a thin neck for this bit, so I could either, you can't really Dremel that out, the gap, because then you won't have the screws. And a lot of the gears I had were pretty much the same depth all the way down. So at the moment it's running much the same ratio, but it's only one screw to change a gear. I'm going to order a couple that have that thin neck to fit in the gearbox casing. And yeah, jobs are good, and we'll be able to experiment with speeds. But I mean, this will obviously run a lot faster just through the motor speed, so at the moment it will still be a good laugh. So all we've got to do now is reinstall this back into the car, install the ESC, and we're there. We'll be ready to rip with our new brushless powered metal drive shaft, just like awesome little FTX Comet. So here we go, one more go, and we'll be there. Okay, well, it's all back together in one piece, looking a lot cooler with its new drive shafts and brushless motor. Now, if all you were going to use was lipos that fitted inside there, you'd now be done. All you'd have to do is put some double-sided tape on this ESC, waz it anywhere on there, plug it in, you're done. But the only thing I find with small lipos is their small capacity. So if you want a longer run time and you want a bigger battery, it's not going to fit inside that little hatch. One option is to go to a full-size battery like we did before. It means you fit your ESC down in here somewhere and your battery goes along there. Now, it fits under the shell fine. It doesn't actually, believe it or not, add much more weight, and obviously it's nicely along the centre line. All you need to do is make some kind of little support between there and there so that it raises the level of the battery up so it doesn't hit the steering arm there. See, when it hits the steering, just need to raise it up by about a centimetre. Just whatever, a block of plastic or something. I don't want to go to the full big battery again because it's just a bit ghetto. I managed to find these. Now these are 1500 milliamp, and if you think of a milliamp is like the size of the fuel tank in the battery, so you know, sort of 500 small, up to that's 5000, holds a lot more electricity. Not more powerful, just how much it holds. I managed to find this little battery, which originally I thought fitted in here, but either my measurements or the website measurements were slightly out, and it doesn't. But it's nice and compact. So what I think I'm going to do is fit this battery tray, again with a little spacer, ESC in this end. Then if I want to use the standard batteries, I simply plug them in through the hole and use the hatch. If I want to use this bigger battery and get twice as long run time, I can then put that in there. And there's your level of the body shell where the posts are. So this gives me two options. So I'm simply going to screw that in with a little spacer there, and make sure when you're screwing it in that your screws don't come through there all sharp and pointy, because if you're using a standard battery and you're going over jumps, that battery could impact into the screw heads, and if you've ever seen a video of someone smacking a nail into a lipo, you know it results in a big massive fire, and yeah, it's not, just don't try it. So I'm going to fit that, and then, so there you have it. I know that's an extra step that probably no one apart from me will need with the whole battery tray thing, but the ESC's there. I've put the on-off switch down there out of the way, and it's now ready to rip in two configurations. You've either got the battery in there, which you'd connect up through that, or alternatively, if you want to use a bigger battery, it just velcros in there, and again it connects. For the purpose of trying this out though, we'll leave that empty. So, as usual, I don't know if there's any charge in this battery. Transmitter on first. The only thing we need to find out is if the motor's going to spin in the right way, or if we need to swap any wires. Battery in, on. Right, it's obviously not happy with something there, so we'll investigate what that is and try again. Okay, well that was weird and confusing, but if you look closely at this receiver, it actually says channel 1, channel 1, channel 2, channel 3. So I don't know, it must be set up to be able to do double steering servos, but I'd gone like channel 1, channel 2, and I managed to plug the motor and the steering into steering. So I was revving it up with the handset. But anyway, just as a tester, I plugged this battery in, transmitter on, does its little beeps, and then we have steering, and we have that's going to be pretty spicy. Reverse, I think that's 40% power. Power! Power! So there we go. That is one fully upgraded FTX. Let's go give it a little whiz round on the grass. Way better. Right, I hope that was helpful. If you're thinking about getting one of these, or you've got one and you're doing it up, go for it. They're a good laugh. We'll take this one down the skate park soon and bash it and see how it does there. Cheers.